Well, friends, it's another day, so of course it's another bogus lawsuit filed by Donald Trump. This one is his obvious effort to try to run out the clock to avoid having to testify to the January 6th committee. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So let's just do a quick takedown of Donald Trump's latest lawsuit. In this most recent court filing, Donald Trump is desperately trying to avoid having to testify before the January 6th House Select Committee investigating the insurrection. And I know you'll find this shocking, but Donald Trump is once again trying to weaponize the delay inherent in the court system to try to run out the clock on having to testify. Here is the latest reporting from CNN. Headline: Trump sues January 6 committee seeking to block subpoena for his testimony and documents. And that article begins, former President Donald Trump has sued the House Select Committee investigating January 6, 2021, as a way to challenge its subpoena for documents and his testimony, according to filings in federal court in Florida. Donald Trump is challenging, first of all, the legitimacy of the committee. Let's stop there and take that on. Donald Trump is wrong. Courts have consistently held that the January 6th House Select Committee is properly constituted, properly impaneled, and it has a legitimate legislative purpose. So Donald Trump is wrong. Donald Trump is also claiming that he should be immune from testimony about the time he was president. Specifically, here's what he says in his lawsuit. The subpoena, quote, is invalid, unlawful, and unenforceable because President Trump, as a former president of the United States, has absolute immunity from being compelled to testify before Congress or a committee thereof regarding his actions as head of a co-equal branch of government. Let's see, Donald Trump is wrong about that. You know, I think the courts last took up absolute immunity in 2008 when a judge named John Bates, a federal district court judge in Washington, D.C., a terrific judge, by the way, had to take on a claim by the George W. Bush administration that high government officials in the executive branch have absolute immunity. They simply can't be subpoenaed. And Judge Bates said, "You're wrong. There is no such thing as absolute immunity. There is no such thing as absolute magical unicorn immunity." And Judge Bates rejected that argument. Now, mind you, a trial court opinion like that doesn't really have the value of precedent. Precedent is set by appellate courts, and it didn't make it up that high. But there is some atmospheric benefit to this issue already having been litigated and rejected. No absolute magical unicorn former presidential immunity. It doesn't exist. But Trump keeps trying in his latest lawsuit. The subpoena's request for testimony and documents from President Trump is an unwarranted intrusion upon the institution of the presidency because there are other sources of the requested information, including the 1,000-plus witnesses the committee has contacted and 1 million documents that the committee has collected, his attorneys argue in the suit. The committee also may obtain abundant government records relevant to its inquiry. Because of this obvious availability to obtain testimony and documents from other readily available sources, the subpoena is invalid. Let me get this straight. Trump's lawyers argue the subpoena is invalid because the J6 committee has interviewed other witnesses, and the J6 committee has obtained documents from other sources. Therefore, that equals the subpoena for testimony from Donald Trump and for documents that Donald Trump may possess is invalid. Let me just use a tried and true legal term for an argument like that. It's stupid, and it's wrong. But Donald Trump keeps trying. Trump said the House's demands, if met, would violate privilege protections around the executive branch, including revealing conversations he had with Justice Department officials and members of Congress about the 2020 election and pending governmental business. It's the pending governmental business privilege. How could we have missed that one? The reason we missed that one is because there's no such thing. Now, when Donald Trump says, well, some of this might be privileged information, okay, I'll grant you that. You might have a Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. You might have an attorney-client privilege if the J6 committee asks you questions about advice that one of your attorneys gave you. And there may even be some executive privilege. But the way you deal with privilege, friends, as Trump's lawyers well know, is you show up, you testify, and if a member of the J6 committee says, Mr. Trump, what advice did your lawyer give you? That is attorney-client privileged information, and I decline to answer that question. That's how you deal with a privilege. You show up, and if a question that is asked of you would conjure up privileged information, you can absolutely decline to answer, invoking the proper privilege. So this nonsense about what his lawyers call the pending governmental business privilege, that's just pure and utter nonsense, and it's wrong. So friends, I'm not going to continue to shoot down the additional arguments Trump's lawyers make in this bogus lawsuit. I'm just going to kind of file it where it deserves to be filed, right over there. And here's the thing. We all know what Donald Trump is really up to. He's trying to run out the clock because it looks like the January 6th committee will expire on January 3rd. That will be the end of the committee, and before that, the committee has announced it will be issuing a final report, sharing its findings with us. So Trump is trying to weaponize the delay in the litigation process to try to run out the clock. And that is the one thing that he might have some success at accomplishing, not any of these bogus arguments that we've just been discussing. And the only way he can have success in weaponizing the delay in the court system and running out the clock is if the courts let him. And the courts don't have to let him. I have argued many times for something called an interbranch dispute court, an IBDC, which would be nothing more than sort of an accelerated court process, an expedited docket, where if you have two branches of government bumping heads legally, engaged in an interbranch dispute, and time is of the essence to get it resolved, well, it shouldn't continue for months or years. It should be resolved promptly. And the courts can do that. The courts can say to Trump's lawyers, you've got 1 week, and then we'll hear your argument, and then within 3 days, for example, we'll decide the issue. You want to appeal it, you get 1 more week, and it will be resolved. You want to try to get the Supreme Court to take it on? Well, we're going to put that on an expedited track as well. Yes, this would take the assistance of the courts, but it can be done. The courts don't have to let Donald Trump weaponize the delay and run out the clock when We all know he is involved in largely bogus litigation, right? The merits of his claims are nonsense. It's the delay that he seeks. So how about the court not give him the delay that he seeks? How about you promptly resolve and reject these bogus claims being raised by Donald Trump? How about we do things in a timely manner?